Thank you for coming back to Marsh Minutes. This week, my guest is Jeffery Straker, and he is the first guest that I've had who has a Wikipedia article. So I'm actually going to read from that. You tell me how much is true and what's not. So Jeffery Straker, born in Punachie, Punishai, okay, there you go. Saskatchewan, is a Canadian folk root singer, songwriter who's based in Toronto, Ontario, and Regina, Saskatchewan. His piano-based pop-based musical style has drawn comparisons to Elton John, Neil Young, Rufus Wainwright, and Chris Christopherson. So, would you say that's pretty apt there?
Yeah, that seems pretty good. I'll buy that for $1.
Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on. I really appreciate it. I know, like, June especially has been a really busy month for you. I think it's kind of interesting. I wasn't planning on the Wikipedia article thing, but that tapped into like what I want to talk about first, which is like what genre you are. And I saw Rufus Wainwright on there too, and I hope it's not. I hope it's okay for me to like make a comparison to that because I get a lot of good vibes and similarities with that.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, and like I would say for my genre now, I slot it as folk roots,
Mhm.
right? 4 years ago, I would have said folk pop. In fact, my first ever, well, actually, my second record that ever came out was probably just more pop, and it's really evolved over time, and that's not been a conscious it's not been a conscious effort to evolve sound, therefore genre. It's just I think human beings, we're all, anybody who's creating anything and creating a creative output, our output is the sum of our inputs. And
Mhm.
over time my inputs have simply changed. Like I listen to roots and Americana and folk music now, and probably no pop music these days, and I always have a hefty dose of 60s, 70s singer-songwriters, like the classic. I can't get enough of that.
Yeah.
Joni Mitchell, Carole King, Gordon Lightfoot, Neil Young and James Taylor, all all that. So I'm listening to all that, as well as Donovan Woods and Jason Isbell and all this sort of stuff. So if that's what's going in, my sound output will change too. So these days, long answer to a very short question, I would say folk roots. But you know what, it has changed. Just like, and actually, because I mentioned Joni, there's another artist who really, her sound changed so much across her albums, right? I
Yeah.
mean, today is the 50th anniversary of the Blue record, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And so, that was her bearing her soul in a very singer-songwriter folky kind of way. And in fact, that record was actually seen as too much for most people. She was too vulnerable. How dare a woman be that vulnerable, And I mean, and so then over time, she switched to jazz and it's like she really changed it up. And I find I'm drawn to musicians who change their sound a bit too. So, and maybe that sort of plays subconsciously into how my sound has changed too. Like that's what I admire about some other artists, and maybe on a deeper level that has provoked change in me too. I don't know. Who knows? But what comes out is it's always interesting to explore with each new record.
Mhm.
It sort of has changed.
Well, I implore anyone to check out your music. You've been doing this for quite a while, and you have all your music videos on YouTube, and you're on Spotify, you're on iTunes. There's a new record, Just Before Sunrise, that's available. I gave it a few listens to. I'm a big fan, and I do see exactly what's happening with that, like evolution of genre, and you're adding different instrumentations or different applications of those instruments in there, and you're playing with it. You're evolving as an artist, which I think you need to do.
I think so. And it's interesting, even with this record, like I felt it was so, like, to me, it was just like so normal to have, a steel guitar with a piano,
Yeah.
or a banjo with a piano. Yet some reviewers have reviewed it and said, he was daring enough to put a steel guitar with a piano. And I was like, I mean, they meant it in a good way, but I was like, is that daring?
Yeah.
I don't know. So, but people, yeah, it's funny how people hear things differently. But I'm glad you heard a change. That's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and genre wise, you ask people who are big music fans who generally listen to everything. And that's what music do you listen to? Everything. That's one of those weird responses to that. And most of the time it's everything except for country. and what they mean is
Yeah,
everything
yeah, yeah.
except for pop country. And then
Yes, yes, yes,
I
yes.
look at like this album has having some like country influences, but more on the folk side of things, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, growing up, it's really funny. I think my sound is probably coming back to where some of the earliest music I listened to. Like on the farm growing up in rural Saskatchewan, my obviously my first music was what my parents were playing, and that was like Dolly Parton, Hank Snow, Roy Acuff, like all that stuff, Loretta Lynn, this kind of stuff, and there was always ABBA as well.
Did they listen to Joni Mitchell, or was that something that you had to
No,
pick up later on?
there was a bit of Joni Mitchell and Gordon Lightfoot in there too. And so it's interesting that, that's what I'm really leaning to now. Like I kind of feel over time, we all kind of go back home, which is actually the theme of Just Before Sunrise. Like that's what the overall theme is.
Hmm.
And interestingly, sonically, that's what I'm doing too. Everything is just sort of simpler and more acoustic and organic. Like it's odd how that happens. And I'm not choosing to, it's just where I'm going. So to your point, like the earliest music um, is kind of what I'm heading back to. I don't know. Maybe that's part of getting older. I don't know.
Maybe, and I think you're touching on something, because maybe this is the end of your hermitage out to Toronto to do that kind of style of music, and then coming back. I'm gonna butcher the song title, but I want to go back there. Is that the
I want to
title?
go back there. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I played that for my mom, and she cried because she thought the song
Oh,
was so beautiful, and it was so like she could understand exactly where you're coming from, and she's not usually a person that dissects music that much. And but it was like, it was very visceral to her, being like, yeah, no, this is like a somber song about wanting to go back home, and the hopefulness around that. And like I think you've been progressing towards that.
I think maybe, yeah, and I agree with you, but I think the thing I find fascinating about it is like none of that is sort of conscious. I don't think, but obviously there's some force at play making it happen. But what that force is, I don't know. Like it's interesting.
I think if you're consciously making music, you're doing it wrong, and you don't have a lot of longevity in the industry to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right too. That's like a whole other conversation.
Well, you touched on the album a little bit there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about it and give a brief breakdown?
Sure, yeah. So it's a 10-song folk roots record called Just Before Sunrise, and it was produced by and large, for the most part, by a producer named Russell Broom in Calgary. Two songs were produced by Royal Wood in Toronto. He also co-wrote two of the songs.
Oh, cool.
Um, so sonically, there's the piano is kind of at the middle of it with piano and vocal, and then sort of a chorus of roots folk, mainly acoustic instruments surround that. There's some songs where we decided to have very little piano at all, because we thought that would sort of serve the song better. Thematically, the songs really kind of talk to, like, and this is, if you look across all 10 of them, they kind of they look back and they take stock and they take a really good look at where the singer and the listener have been. um, do a bit of an assessment, if you will, sort of survey the territory, and then I feel, again, this wasn't conscious, but I feel the record ends up with an overall tone of optimism, like looking forward with optimism. Like, so it gets comfortable with where one has come from. Hopefully, it takes the listener on that journey, and then it seems to end on a note overall of positivity. Like it's like, and now we set forth from here, and with a bit of a clean slate. And it's kind of a record about getting comfortable with where you've come from in order to try to figure out where it is that you're going.
And when did you start writing the majority of the songs for this? Was it during the pandemic?
No, but and I get asked that question, and I know why I get asked that question. But there's a reason why that question comes up, and most of these songs started to be written 2.5 years ago, just as my mom passed away.
Right.
So, it was which was obviously a really huge upheaval in my life, like the biggest emotional upheaval ever. But the parallel of the feeling in the wake of mom passing away, those feelings were very similar to when the pandemic hit. This kind of emptiness, this unsuredness, this, where's this all headed? Like, it's a very similar thing. Like, it's almost like, for sure, there was heavy, heavy grief in the wake of mom passing away. It was a massive and almost unmanageable. Work through it. And in fact, writing the songs on this record were a huge part of that therapy. But then when the pandemic hit too, those same questions came up, but for there was another trigger. So I totally see why that question would come up. It's really interesting.
I'm sorry to hear that. I knew about that, and it's good that you had that outlet to be able to do that, and be able to make the best of it, I guess, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny. Like, there's 2 songs on the record that were written when mom was actually in the hospital. She had this very funny thing happen to her, and that she got this infection that just went out of control, and it turned into septic shock. And so she was in the ICU on life support. And then at one point, after being on a life support for quite a few days, she emerged from it, like, to everybody's surprise. And we thought, oh, she's going to be okay. Like, it'll take a lot of rehabilitation, but she's going to be okay. And so during that time, I wrote these songs. And then a few days later, she ended up passing away. So it was like the whole thing was this roller coaster of extreme emotions. But so some of the songs were written then, and then some were written in the process after she had passed away, about sort of processing grief. And then the further away from it that I got, I think probably the more understanding, or the more you've worked through it, the songs kind of change. So they were very much written in this time, though. Like, when someone like your mom passes away, it's this really up close conversation with your own mortality is what you end up having. And so, a lot of it was like questioning, like, once you sort of sort out where it is that you've been and where you've come from, then you tilt forward and you're like, okay, where am I going? But then people who have their wits about them would then ask themselves, in addition to where I'm going, you ask yourself the question, where would I like to be going? And that's often a different answer. Luckily for me, it was the same answer, but sometimes it's not, and then therefore you have a midlife crisis.
Well, if the midlife crisis manifests in more great music, I think you could probably be appreciative of that, and at least I am. So.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Midlife crisis
No, I think it's a great record. I'm going to put everything in the show notes there. Available on CD and vinyl, which I'm going to pick up from you sometime soon. You're still in Regina, right? I'm going to have to do that. And on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere that would have music. Yeah.
Sure.
So no, it's great to hear from that, and it's great to be able to kind of reconcile those emotions into that. And I noticed I heard Jill a lot more in this record than I normally have. Is that correct?
You know what, that backing vocalist?
Yes.
That's actually not my sister.
Oh, okay.
We recorded. You're hearing the voice you are hearing the voice of a backing singer.
Yes.
She was a gal in Calgary who Russell, the producer, identified as the timbre of voice he wanted for this.
Gotcha.
Jill travels, though she sounds kind of like Jill, so you're not wrong. Jill with a job and a child now just is able to travel with me way less. So she sings shows at home in Regina, but really doesn't come on the road much anymore. Sadly.
Well, it's good that producers have a different ear for those kind of things, right? And,
yeah.
It would have been nice to hear Jill on the record, I guess, and maybe work with her on that. I'm sure you worked with her with some of the songs, and have been in discussion with that. That actually leads into something else I wanted to talk about, which your Christmas special, which is what was it called? The Jeffery Straker's
Very Prairie Christmas.
Very Prairie Christmas. That's it. I have been to 2 of those, and I was really looking forward to last year's. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Yes.
We go every year. I take my mom, I take my mother-in-law, my wife. We have a blast with it, and Jill performs with you there. That was kind of the segue that I go into. So it's really unfortunate that couldn't happen. Are you kind of hopeful that it's going to happen again this year?
Well, between you and me and the wall, there may be a few dates on hold. So we'll see. It's obviously pending what COVID will do. At this point in time, if things COVID related progress the way they are, like it will happen. But I mean, fall will be a big telltale, not
Yeah.
just for that show, but for live music in general. Like we're all kind of giddy right now, but I think we're cautiously giddy.
I know I am friends with a lot of artists who that was kind of their lifeline is performing live, especially nowadays when you're making music and putting music online. It's not necessarily as monetarily beneficial to you, and a lot of that stuff, the money that comes back to you is from merchandise and from purchasing physical records and the performances that you're doing as well.
Yeah, so I mean, my number it's like between 80 and 90% of my living comes from live performances. So but I mean, it'll have changed a bit this year because when you have a new album, you sell a lot of the new album. But so
Yeah.
it'll adjust a bit this year. But it's suffice it to say, a lot. Like the vast majority of my income comes from live performances. So it's great to be getting back into them now, sort of post COVID. But with the online shows, I mean, that was a really interesting thing to go through and experience because when we first had to switch from doing live shows to online shows, um what saved me, sort of what got me through the pandemic, was the generosity of my fans in these online shows last April, May, June, because I would do a Facebook live show and I could easily have between 300 to sometimes 1,200 devices log in and watch these shows. And I'd put up a donate link because it was like a concert, and
Mhm.
people were very happily donating. And it helped. It earned me enough income to bide me through the pandemic, and that's all hugely, huge amounts of gratitude to fans. However, what happened though, and I certainly don't fault anyone for this, people became screen fatigued. And it's
Mhm.
because they're spending all day online with Zoom meetings and this meeting and God knows what kind of meetings, but they're staring at the screen. By the end, like even by 2 months ago, the last thing they wanted to do was come home in the evening and stare at another screen.
Yeah.
So the idea of the online show, I think it sort of had its big moment at the start of the pandemic. I think we saw a more realistic view of what those things really will be by the end of the pandemic. Like I don't think, like, they will never substitute live music. There's no way.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I come from the side of things that like Twitch and YouTube and a lot of those things that are
Yeah.
entirely online based.
Hmm.
And it's a
Hmm.
very different audience and it's a very different type of medium that's there.
Yeah.
Nothing beats like a live performance of a musician, right?
Yeah.
And like really, I'll be completely heartbroken if I can't go see the Christmas show again because it is one of the things I look forward to all year.
Oh, well, I really hope it happens too. I mean, and that's very nice of you to say too.
Well, it's like what it's called, a very prairie Christmas. You get everyone together, and it's not like it's easy to say, oh yeah, it's like this, right? It's like
Right.
the Christmas specials you see on TV, like the Buble Christmas specials, right? It's that, but local and with all these different artists and all these different like you had Stephanie Langenegger on last time, correct?
We
To
had it was
read.
Shauna Powers,
Shauna
I think.
Powers, yeah. So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
to
yeah.
read, and that was a nice little interlude in between the music and merging of genres, and the thing that kind of held everything together is a love of Christmas and a love of home in the prairies. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that that's what you were going for, and
Yeah,
if
yeah,
so,
yeah,
you nailed it 100%.
yeah.
So
That is what I was going for. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing because like I love those. Oh, I loved those Christmas specials of past. Like it seems that no one's producing them anymore, really. But people remember them and have an appetite for them, and so there's some trying to tap into that feeling was kind of what I wanted to do. Obviously, with a local spin on it, and it's kind of a variety show, and a bit of a homey feeling. So I mean, yeah. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm so glad you described it just the way you did because if I had written a brief about it, you would have ticked all the boxes.
well, I'm just saying what I kind of feel, and it's easy to convey that when you're expressing that in what the show is.
Well,
Um,
that's cool.
and
Yeah,
so how many days did you have last time the show was on?
we had two, and we were gonna move it to well, we did two locally, but then what we did is we then booked it we booked it all over the place. We had two shows in Moose Jaw. We had one in PA, North Battleford,
Wow.
Medicine Hat. Like there were two in Saskatoon. The pandemic ended up killing most of them.
Yeah.
We were able to do last year we did one in PA, one in North Battleford with very small local audiences in the theater. You could have 30, and then
Yeah.
all the other tickets were online. It just wasn't the same, as you know. Hopefully, though, what we can do is bring it back and back to Casino Regina, which is kind of the mothership of the show,
Yes.
where we have that room is perfect for that, right? And then maybe do a few more around the province too. But we'll see. We gotta sort of sort of tiptoe into the fall and see what this pesky virus will let us do.
And what about our neighbors to the east and west, Alberta and Manitoba? Is that something you guys discussed as well?
Well, kind of, but so Medicine Hat was booked last year to be the first sort of tiptoe into Alberta, and and much to my surprise, like because I don't really have a huge following there per se, but the tickets were selling really well, and it was in this really nice theater. I forget what the Esplanade Center. So and I know the Calgary Folk Club, which has a really big audience, wants to bring it there this year too if they can. So that would be a Calgary stop. So, I'd like to go a little bit into Manitoba too, but I'm also aware that this is the kind of show that you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about it with this sort of it's the local factor, I think, that makes it special. So, you know, I'm not sure how far one would want to take it geographically to because you want to maintain that local feel,
Yeah.
because it's that feel of being wrapped up in a blanket with, by the fire that kind of makes it special. So I gotta tiptoe into this. I don't know.
Well, and even though we kind of squabble, right, they're still our brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
So
exactly,
they're still the
exactly.
prairies,
Yeah.
None of these surfer guys out, in BC or the big
Yeah.
coats,
No,
big suits
not
rather.
having it.
No, no,
Not
no.
having it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Looking forward to that again. I would like to talk a little more, and we touched on this a little bit, but so this is a marketing show, and primarily digital is what I do, but work on
Hmm.
everything in terms of consulting. So I don't know. Tell me how marketing your music is nowadays.
Well, I mean, let me see how I'd answer that one. Where I would start with is how I would typically do it. Let's pretend there was no pandemic. You would typically in the past have launched a single, maybe two, and then the album. Put a bit of support behind of each single to hint at here's the record that's about to come out. You just release those singles, online on the digital platforms, and then the record would come out online as well as a physical copy, and then you would tour it, and you'd earn your money. Your income from the live show. You'd interact with your fans as the tour happened. Your publicist would get the music out to the writers, whether they're regional papers or TV or radio or whatever. Your radio promoter would work on getting the songs out to relevant radio shows, and somewhere in there, you'd hope that it reaches enough ears and sort of like reaches new fans. Each time you release a new record, you'd want to, with those efforts, reach some new listeners, right? And so expand your audience that way, and then you'd hope that your tour is also getting to more new listeners. And essentially, every artist in the history of music, that's kind of how
Hmm.
their audience growth has gone. With this is the first time I've launched a record in a pandemic, and I was actually going to launch this record last May. And when I realized I couldn't do that properly, I
Hmm.
put it off a few months and thought, well, this pandemic's obviously going to go away in 2 months, so I'll just wait a few months, and this thing I'll have blown away like the wind, and that didn't happen. So finally, I put it off, and then May came along, and we started planning in advance for May in about January with my publicist and my marketer and my agent, and we're trying to figure out how to do this. And so what that meant is that I did start launching singles the May before. So by the time the record launched, 5 songs had launched as singles. And interestingly, what I found is that method, much to my surprise, and just total forced experimentation, has provided the largest engagement on a record release I've ever done. So instead of releasing 1 or 2 singles, leading up to the record, launching 5 of them, each with a bunch of social media tooting, and you release a single, then pause and go away and don't talk about new music for a while. A couple months later, hey, here's another single, and it really ramped up my online audiences, like to the point where my
Wow.
online audiences have grown the most I've ever seen them grow. It was really fascinating.
You
So
could almost compare that to when a new TV show comes out on Netflix and
yeah,
you watch it all, in a weekend or a
yeah,
couple days or whatever that might be. And you're just like, okay, it's over. But
yep,
what Disney Plus is doing now, they're releasing an episode each week, and it's kind of got like,
yeah,
I don't have cable. I haven't had cable for 5 years.
same, yeah,
Exactly. And it's interesting because I never liked that episodic type of thing, but when it's
yeah,
easily accessible, I could watch it whenever. I don't have to PVR it or,
yeah.
wait a specific time. And it is more engaging, and it does get you excited for the next one and doesn't burn you out. So I think there
Mhm.
might be some parallels there.
There could be, and I mean, I honestly would have thought that's too. Like, I would have thought, oh, that's too much. You're giving away half the record before the record comes out. But what it has done is like what I've learned is like, so not everyone liked every single, right? So
Mhm.
then, but so they might have really engaged with one, and then maybe because the way social media works, like only it's like only like 5% of your followers will see a given Facebook post, right? Like it's not without buying ads. Facebook's no dummies. They know how
Mhm.
this works, right?
Yeah.
So not all fans saw even knew all singles were out. So what it meant is I had 5 attempts or 5 cracks at reaching listeners and saying, "Hey, a record's coming out. Hey, a record's coming out. Hey, a record's coming out." 5 times, and then the record did come out. And with those 5 times telling people a record's coming out, I think that resulted in more people knowing the record was coming out. And then the record was out, and it's got I mean, this is not earth-shattering numbers, but for me, 1 month after release, it's got over 100,000 spins. So for me, that's a lot for me, like
Yeah.
folk rootsy Jeffrey Straker. So it's interesting to see that my last record, this has more spins in a month than my last record did in 4 years.
Mhm.
So it's quite fascinating, right? So in tandem with that, how I released this one, I couldn't tour. So I did do something that I learned a lot of interesting sort of things from. I did an online tour. So I partnered with 6 venues across the country to do 6 shows online.
Mhm.
We shot on a stage in Regina, and then partnered with 6 different theaters and festivals, and box office the show, sold the tickets in conjunction with them. They sold to their audiences, I sold to mine in that area, and we got a really nice audience across the country that way too. The thing, and so and ticket sales were quite good. They certainly weren't as good as they would have been last May had we done it a year ago,
Yeah.
just because of that fatigue. But I mean, how you can't win them all.
No.
But that was a neat new thing I'd never done before.
Well, it's really interesting that you're being data driven with looking at your analytics. That's a lot of what I try to stress to anyone I'm working with to do, right? Because the
Yeah.
the proof is in the data that you're given. And so now, given that data and given the information that you have now, are you going to adjust how you're going to release future records because of that?
Yeah, so like I for sure will release multiple singles in advance of the record again. It's like, and I was trying to explain this to another musician the other day who shall remain unnamed, and they were like, "Oh, it just seems like you're giving away too much." I'm like, I know it seems that way, but the result was that there was just simply more engagement. So I would like, there's no way I would not do that, given
Mhm.
given how I probably would. I mean, if I can tour live next time, like I wouldn't do the online tour again, but I would still mix in a smattering of online shows because there are people who simply, the night I'm in their community, it doesn't work for them, or their theater or
Mhm.
whatever. So doing a couple online shows is still a thing that makes sense. So I learned a lot from this. Sort of being thrown a bucket of lemons. I mean, a bit of a lemonade did come from this.
Yeah.
At the same time, my publicist still did all the work that she would do, not in a pandemic. You still reach out to the same media. There was a bit of a problem there, only in that, and she's a really amazing publicist. She found that because it's a pandemic and so few people are touring, everyone was pitching their music to all the media. And
Yes.
let's face it, there's so little media left that they just like they're overwhelmed.
Mhm.
So one should adjust down their expectations from media, as we sadly slowly watch them all, disintegrate anyway.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I did do though is I engaged a digital marketer who worked various ways of sort of promoting my music to various people, that digitally, that hey, there are songs on all these digital platforms, help to get some songs on some playlists, etc. Some pretty hefty playlists too that help to get new listeners too. So to me, like engaging a digital marketer is also something I would do again too, because we're really in such a digital age. It really helps.
I'm gonna get that soundbite. I'm gonna play it for every single person I pitch my services to now. And it's good that you were able to reach out and kind of identify where your strengths were and where you needed to work a little bit at. And I've actually found that a lot of people have reached out to my services that wouldn't have necessarily done that because, like, oh, we have to change, we have to do something different,
Yeah.
because the world is the way it is.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
know, one thing I saw that I'm still fascinated with was I did a campaign with some Facebook ads to grow to like in the right way, grow some new followers behind my music on my Facebook fan
Mhm.
page, which really worked really well. And so with Facebook ads pointed there, what I was so surprised at was how with doing no Google ads, my YouTube subscribership grew immensely by focusing on Facebook. And it's because these people, they don't live in a box. Like they're trotting across all the spaces online, right?
Mhm.
So, even Twitter grew, YouTube grew by even just by trying by working to get more followers on Facebook. So I mean, I don't understand it. I don't understand the online world holistically as much as you would, but it's fascinated how intertwined the whole thing is, you know?
Well, so the principle with that is that you have to convey the most basic level of information because then people are going to turn their brains off. So if I say this is Jeffery Straker, this is his music, awesome. You don't have to go, oh yeah, no, but go here, click here, blah blah blah. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
okay, Jeffery Straker. I wonder if he's on YouTube or Jeffrey Straker. I'm going to
Okay,
Google him,
yeah.
and it's interesting. It's funny because when you Google Jeffrey Straker, because I was looking up several things to put in the show notes and everything, first thing that comes up is Jeffrey Straker age.
I saw that the other day too.
But you type in Jeffrey Straker, and all your stuff's there because you already have a prolonged career and enough of an impact online that as long as you say, "Hey, I'm here," people are like, "Okay, well, where else are you?" and they'll look it up.
I think you're. I like. I have to disagree with that because that's what I saw happen. Like people clearly were going to other platforms to see, like, oh, is he here? Is he here? Is he here? It's really so that digital marketing piece was I engaged in that the most ever with the launch of this record, and I found it fascinating. And it was
Mhm.
interesting to see, like, um, you know, demographics and numbers and if this platform grew, what did this platform do? Like it's really interesting stuff. And what I can't wait to see, and I've already seen a little bit of it, is I did some shows over the past couple of weeks, small shows but public shows, and there were some brand new listeners
Mhm.
who found me online. So that the digital stuff translated into physical bodies in an audience. So that
Yeah.
was really neat to see it come full circle.
Yeah, no, I'm excited that you're excited about this, and I'm definitely gonna reach out and chat with you more for the next record because you learn lessons and you try new things, and um,
Yeah.
I love data, so I just want to see exactly how that works. Use you as a
Yeah.
proxy to
Yeah.
kind of learn.
I know you're a data nerd. I am too. Like I'm always sort of like almost put off at how much I like it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and
But it's interesting.
that's what we discussed about first when we first kind of met up and hung out. It's like, hey, how's your data? What's Spotify look like?
Yeah.
What's all this? And it was just fascinating because it's a industry that I don't work with directly, but you can get lessons and apply them elsewhere.
The tricky thing to do, though, I think, given that at the end of the day, where I approach this from is making music, which is an art. Like there is a point where, as much as like the business part of the music business is fascinating, like I really do get a bit of a rush out of it. I
Mhm.
have to be able to turn that off to be able to just like sing songs
Yeah.
and just have my brain be in its full right side mode of just creating something. So it's constantly that balancing juggling act for an independent musician
Yeah.
to be like, okay, shut the business off and just enjoy creation here.
That's why
That's a battle.
that's why you have the publicist, and that's why you have the digital marketing
Yes.
team, and surround yourself with people who can assist you so you can do what you're best at.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you being on, and I just look forward to every single thing you're doing. going forward. Like, your new record has been out for quite a while, but if anyone hasn't listened to it before, Just Before Sunrise, available on iTunes, Spotify, and I don't know if I touched on this, but you have a new video coming out tomorrow.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. So there's it's for a song off my new record called Ready to Be Brave. The song is really about mustering up the courage to come face to face with something difficult in your life. Like it's specifically probably having a difficult conversation with someone, whether it be, a sibling, a friend, a parent, a lover, whoever. So the song was written in a way that hopefully any listener could insert themselves into it. To make a video, to tell a story, you obviously have to choose a specific story.
Mm-hmm.
So ours is set on a farm. We shot it in Saskatchewan. It's my first ever music video that I've ever not appeared in.
Oh.
Instead, we use a cast of actors to tell our story. It's beautifully shot by Versa Films out of Saskatoon. They're a great video production company. Dylan Hershuk is the director. And I can't applaud enough for that cast. I mean, some of them are professional actors, some of them are first timers, but like between the beautiful cinematography and the acting, it tells what I think is a really beautiful story. Like, there's so much love in this video. It's going to catch some people off guard, I will tell you that much.
Okay.
It's a story that's not been told a lot, but I'll leave it there to hopefully pique curiosity, and we'll see if people watch.
Well, that comes out tomorrow on June 23rd. This episode's not going to go out until the following Monday, but I'll put links in there. I can't wait to see it. I'll shoot you a message and let you know what I think.
Sure, yeah.
But
only if you like it.
Oh no, well, I'll give you my honest feedback.
Yeah, do, exactly.
You deserve that. So you have the floor if you want to talk about anything else. I think the whole show was pretty much a promotion for a lot of the stuff you're doing, as artists usually are. But
well, I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, just one. Here's because you talk about marketing so much in what you do. This is interesting. And whether or not you want to include this or not, but because my record is called Just Before Sunrise, I snooped around and found a local coffee roaster in Saskatchewan in Outlook called the Prairie Roastery.
Awesome.
And I said, look, I've got a record called Just Before Sunrise. I think coffee would make sense as a thing, like to help me, a possible merch item or like something. Coffee kind of goes with morning. Like, so I have a roast of coffee. It's my Just Before Sunrise coffee roast that I take to shows. And so I had my first real shows with this past weekend, and it sold like hotcakes. I sold out of this coffee, and I was quite flabbergasted because I was like, oh, is anybody going to buy coffee from a singer pianist? And the answer is yes. So there was a bit of a learning in there to be like hop out of the box with merch ideas. So it could have completely failed and I would have had an awful lot of coffee on my hands, but it seems to have worked. So it was a neat sort of experiment so far.
So what you're saying is you need to partner up with a brewery and have your record around nighttime for the next one.
Exactly. The next one will be called like Suds in the Night or something. Exactly.
Oh,
something
man.
like that. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much, man. It was great having you. And if anyone wants to find out more about you, there's going to be a bunch of notes in the bottom, and look forward to seeing what you got going on.
Sure. Thanks for the chat. I really appreciate it.
Okay. See you.
Bye.